Something just happened in one of the most critical choke points on Earth, and the impact is hitting far beyond the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway that carries nearly a fifth of the world's oil, has suddenly turned into the center of a high-stakes power struggle. But this time, it's different. This isn't just about tension, threats, or sanctions. This is something far more direct. In a move that caught even seasoned analysts off guard, the United States has effectively tightened control around Hormuz, disrupting Iran's ability to move its most valuable resource, oil. And within days, the consequences began to show. Exports dropped, tankers stalled, revenue started disappearing. But this is where it gets even more serious, because what's unfolding now is not just an economic shock, it's a chain reaction that could reshape regional power, destabilize internal systems, and trigger consequences no one can fully predict yet. And the real question is, how did it escalate this fast? And what happens next? To understand the scale of what's happening, you have to start with geography. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another shipping route, it is the main artery for oil exports from the Gulf. For Iran, it has always been more than that. It has been leverage. For years, Iran has relied on this narrow passage as both an economic lifeline and a strategic pressure point. The logic was simple. If Iran couldn't export oil freely, it could threaten to disrupt global supply. But this time, the situation flipped. Instead of Iran controlling the pressure started closing in on Iran. The United States deployed naval forces across key positions in and around the strait and extended monitoring operations into nearby waters. But this is where things changed. This wasn't just surveillance, it became enforcement. Tankers suspected of carrying Iranian oil began facing inspections, delays, and in some cases, direct intervention. Routes that once allowed quiet movement were no longer safe, and the impact was immediate. According to maritime data, Iran's oil exports dropped sharply, falling from nearly 1.8 million barrels per day to just over 500,000 in a matter of weeks. That kind of drop isn't just a statistic, it's a financial shock. Billions of dollars in monthly revenue began to disappear. Storage facilities started filling faster than expected. And at key export points like Chabahar, vessels began to pile up, unable to move. But the real issue wasn't just blocked exports. It was what happens when oil can't leave at all, because oil production doesn't just pause without consequences. When storage reaches its limit, production must slow down or even stop. And restarting those systems isn't always simple. Some wells, once shut, never return to full capacity, and this is where the risk becomes long-term. But the situation didn't stop there. Because just as Iran was trying to rely on alternative routes, another unexpected move changed the entire equation. While Iran was dealing with mounting pressure at sea, a regional shift was quietly unfolding, and it hit at the worst possible time. The United Arab Emirates made a strategic decision that altered the entire balance. Instead of depending on routes tied to Hormuz, the UAE expanded its use of the Fujairah pipeline, a system that transports oil directly to the Gulf of Oman, completely bypassing the strait. And this is where the strategy becomes clear, because this move effectively removed one of Iran's biggest leverage points. While Iran struggled to export through blocked pathways, the UAE increased its output through an alternative route. Exports surged, supply continued, and global markets adjusted. But the consequences for Iran were severe, because now it wasn't just losing volume, it was losing influence. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Reports indicated that Iran had limited storage capacity remaining, possibly just a few weeks before facilities reach their maximum levels. Once that happens, production cuts become unavoidable, and production cuts lead to something even more dangerous: permanent loss. In petroleum systems, shutting down wells under pressure can damage reservoirs. Analysts estimate that a portion of Iran's production, hundreds of thousands of barrels per day, could be lost long term. But the escalation didn't stop at infrastructure. It extended into the financial system. With declining exports and falling revenues, economic pressure began building inside the country. Inflation surged, currency value dropped, basic goods became harder to access, and this is where things started shifting internally. Security assessments suggested that economic strain could trigger unrest. Job losses in the private sector were expected to rise sharply, and the timeline for stability began shrinking. But there was another layer to this strategy. The blockade wasn't just about stopping oil, it was about tracking every attempt to bypass it. Advanced monitoring systems, satellite tracking, and coordinated naval operations turned every tanker into a visible target. Insurance companies pulled back, shipping firms avoided risk, and suddenly, even indirect routes became nearly impossible. This is what made the situation different from sanctions. Sanctions can be bypassed. A physical blockade is much harder to avoid, and this is where analysts began to realize this wasn't temporary pressure, it was systematic containment. Now the consequences are becoming clearer. Iran is facing pressure on multiple fronts: economic, industrial, and internal. Oil exports have dropped sharply. Revenue losses are mounting. Storage capacity is nearing limits, and parts of the energy sector may suffer long-term damage. But the real impact came later, because this isn't just about oil. It's about stability. Economic pressure is already affecting daily life: rising prices, reduced services, and increasing uncertainty. And when economic stress builds, it often leads to something more unpredictable: internal tension. At the same time, regional dynamics are shifting. Countries that once relied on shared routes are finding alternatives. Supply chains are adapting, and Iran's influence in the energy market is weakening. And now, three possible paths are emerging. The first, negotiation, a deal that could ease restrictions but require major concessions. The second, continued resistance, which could deepen economic strain and increase internal pressure. And the third, escalation, where tensions move beyond economic measures into direct confrontation. But here's the reality: each option carries risk, and none of them offer a quick resolution. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a regional issue, it's a global signal. Because what happens here affects energy markets, political stability, and strategic balance across the world. And as events continue to unfold, one question remains unanswered: is this the peak of the crisis or just the beginning?